morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on Bloomberg Quint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. Asian markets are off to a weak start after stocks on Wall Street fell the most since March on lingering trade tensions. The Chinese administration has confirmed that Vice Premier Liu He will be visiting Washington for a two-day visit starting tomorrow to continue trade negotiations with the U.S. In earnings, a strong performance by Vedanta's zinc and aluminium business drove its March quarter performance. The company's oil and gas business outperformed as well. And Titan will be the only Nifty company to report earnings today. Strong sales in the jewelry business will likely have resulted in a strong operational performance this quarter. And the National Company Law Tribunal will begin insolvency proceedings against Reliance Communications. Let's talk about the equity markets across the globe now. It was a red across the board during Tuesday's trading session on Wall Street. The Nasdaq and the S&P 500 fell the most since March, while the Dow Jones saw its biggest percentage fall since the 3rd of January. President Trump's latest tariff threats continue to weigh on the minds of investors. Emma Chandra of Bloomberg News sums up the day's trade on Wall Street in this report.
U.S. markets extended declines for a second day Tuesday, selling off across the board. The Dow Jones closed down close to 500 points lower, with every component ending the day in the red. For most of the session, it was the worst day since January for the S&P 500, with every sector falling. However, we did see a little rally in the last 30 minutes of trading, meaning the S&P 500 closed off the lows. Tech led the way down, and so we saw the Nasdaq post the biggest losses on the day, closing just 4 basis points shy of a 2% loss. The tech sector, of course, extremely sensitive to trade news due to its exposure to China. And of course, it has been the fear of higher and expanded tariffs as soon as Friday, threatened by President Trump, that has spurred this sell-off. Higher volumes, another key component of the day, close to 30% higher for the Dow Jones, and volume built throughout the session for all three major indexes. We've also been seeing a deterioration in breadth. More and more stocks in the S&P 500 have been slipping below their 50-day averages, and in fact, the S&P 500 itself is close to testing its own 50-day average. Boeing and Mylan were individual stocks that suffered regardless of trade concerns. Drug maker Mylan falling more than 20% and having its worst day since 2000, as sales in North America and Europe fell significantly. Investors there also worried about the lack of an update on the company's strategic review. For Boeing, analyst action from Barclays sparked an almost 4% drop. The analyst there saying investors are underappreciating the risk to the stock from the 737 MAX crashes and the subsequent global grounding of the plane. He says that recovery will take longer than expected. Emma Chandra, Bloomberg News, New York.
All right, we're just trying to get some cues from the Asian markets as well as to how we're going to start trade in India. But I'm joined live now by Sophie Kamruddin of Bloomberg News. She's joining us from the Singapore studios. Morning, Sophie. Not the best cues going into trade this morning. What are the latest cues that you're picking up?
Yeah, we are seeing mid-week pain, not positive cues indeed, with broad losses across the region led lower by Japan, with the Nikkei 225 set for a back-to-back drop of more than 1%. And the Topix is on track for the worst two-day decline in 2 months, while the yen holds near a 6-week high. Now in Tokyo, electronics are among the biggest drag, and Yamaha Motor is the worst performer on the Nikkei, sinking after its weak results, which indicate the car maker may miss guidance this year. Now over in Seoul, about two-thirds of Kospi-listed stocks are under pressure, and the ASX 200 in Sydney is losing ground, with energy and tech the biggest sectoral drags. Now in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng is also under pressure, slipping below 29,000 points, and in Shanghai, we are seeing weakness across the board for mainland markets. The Shanghai Composite down nearly 2% at the start of cash trade. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Sophie. Now, a lot of eyes are turning to Washington this week for the latest on the trade talks. The Chinese administration has confirmed that Vice Premier Liu He will be heading to Washington for a two-day visit starting tomorrow. Talks will continue despite rising concerns about the prospects of a deal. Tom McKenzie of Bloomberg News brings you the latest in this update.
As you say, China's vice premier, who does lead the negotiating team from the Chinese side, will be in Washington Thursday and Friday for what are turning out to be absolutely crucial talks. These could be make or break conversations between the two sides. And the question really is whether or not the Chinese side goes to D.C. ready to make some concessions to address the concerns that we've heard about from Lighthizer and Mnuchin that were articulated on Monday evening, U.S. time, particularly around the enforcement mechanism and around things like intellectual property and around transferring those and baking those into China's legal structure. Or if the Chinese side go there playing hardball. We've seen a commentary from the People's Daily, the mouthpiece of the party, out just in the last few minutes, saying that China is confident that it can deal with these trade talk challenges. But the omens, to some degree, don't look good. We've heard in the past from the Chinese saying that they won't negotiate with a gun to its head. And we know as well from our sources here that China is preparing retaliatory tariffs if indeed the US goes ahead and hikes these tariffs from 10 to 25%, as they said they will do. We've also spoken to our team here, Lu Xiang from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. We got a quote from him. This is a state-backed think tank here in Beijing. Lu Xiang saying, if the Trump administration follows through with tariffs, with the tariffs threat, it means, I think, talks will fall apart. We then need to prepare for worse than worst. That is from the member or a member of a leading think tank here in Beijing. So again, these are crucial talks that will be taking place in Washington over the next few days.
And Tom, is this tougher U.S. stance a sign that the hawks in the Trump administration now have the upper hand?
Well, it certainly seems that the likes of trade advisor Peter Navarro and, of course, Lighthizer, who uses or leads the negotiations on the U.S. side, are winning the argument in terms of taking a tougher stance. Even Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, who'd been seen as something of a dove, came out on Monday and told reporters that his entire economic team was supporting this stance on raising tariffs. And then you've got the noises and the voices from outside the White House, the likes of former White House strategist Steve Bannon writing an editorial, an opinion piece saying that even if there is a deal, it will be a temporary truce, I'm quoting Steve Bannon, in a years-long economic and strategic war with China. Then you've got the Democrats, the likes of Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, saying that it's time to hold out and backing Trump's stance on raising tariffs as well. Ironically, it's the Republicans, particularly from the farming states, who are coming under the most pressure. So, yes, the hardliners for now seem to be winning the day in Washington. But, of course, we do know that Trump is concerned about the impact on the markets, so possibly that will come into play at some point. But for now, this tougher, more aggressive stance from the US seems to be the position that is leading out and winning out in Washington.
All right, so you now know what's at stake in the second half of this week with regard to the trade talks. And amidst all of that noise about trade talks, one thing has certainly been put on the back burner, at least for us here in this newsroom, and that's the Brexit. The latest from the UK is that Prime Minister Theresa May is close to sealing a deal. Sources also tell Bloomberg that the UK might adopt the customs union in order to prevent a second referendum. Jody Schneider of Bloomberg News brings you the latest in this update.
They are talking, and they say they're making progress, and Theresa May says they'll continue to talk, that they will, and then they will end the talks soon, with or without an agreement. But she has made, there's all kinds of signals that she is stepping back from one of her red lines, which was to not have a permanent customs union with the EU, to leave that permanent customs union. And that seems to be something that the Labour Party can work with. That if there's not just this temporary customs union, but there's something there. Now, of course, she doesn't want it called that because that would be betraying members of her, that could be viewed as a betrayal to members of her party with whom she said they would not have a permanent customs union. But it looks like they are talking, they are continuing to talk, and Jeremy Corbyn and his folks are giving signals that these are the kinds of discussions that they could live with.
We're actually coming up to 3 years from that first referendum. That's
June 23rd.
Yeah, 6 weeks from now. Where are we on a second one? And might that actually be a point where Theresa May and Mr. Corbyn can agree?
Actually, there is some agreement there. Jeremy Corbyn so far is resisting attempts from some in his party to say that any agreement with the Prime Minister on the customs union, or whatever you call it, must be predicated on having a second referendum. So he's so far, holding back on that. She, of of course, is very opposed to a second referendum, saying that can't occur. She would be more willing to have the customs union than that second referendum. So far, they're both, at least for now, resisting that second vote.
All right, well, let's turn to the Indian markets now, and Agam Vakil is here to tell you about the day's trade and also what's happening in the futures and options space. Agam, on a lighter note, in the world of football, it was a day for the Reds. It's a day for the Reds in the markets today, red across the board.
Yeah.
How are we looking here in India?
I'm not sure I want to draw parallels there, Alex, because it's certainly
one is extremely positive.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
But when it comes to your SGX Nifty, we're looking at a little bit of weakness, and perhaps that can be, drawn and taken as a parallel when it comes to Barcelona supporters. But moving on to our own markets at this point in time, we're seeing what we saw yesterday was so about a near 1% cut, and again the small cap and the mid cap markets again looking at moving in largely in tandem with the benchmarks. It was the same for the banking indices too, but the PSU banking index specifically saw a little deeper when it comes to declines coming through. But and Infosys, Wipro, and Tata Motors among others which are losing out. But Tata Motors specifically looking at deep cuts, along with ICICI Bank, which also declined by as much as 4%, perhaps an indication of what we can expect as we move into trade today. But pardon me, another 645 crores odd worth of selling from FIIs. Do remember that after a very strong month of March and to a certain extent April as well, we're now starting to see some amount of consistency in FII selling on a day-to-day basis. DI is buying stock worth around 818 crores. But when it comes to your contributors, Reliance Industries, ICICI Bank, along with ITC bearing down on the indices, and that those stocks provided the bulk of the losses. How about the futures and options space? What's really happening in there is about 4.5% increase in open interest there towards more shorts building into the system, along with the Bank Nifty, which is also seen as much as 12% added in OI. And moving on, we also have essentially the 11,800 put, which has seen more writing, surprisingly, considering we saw further weakness there. But when it comes to the wicks, of course, we're keeping an eye on the 26.5, considering we didn't really see too much of an increase in the wicks, but it is still at extremely high levels. In fact, at a 4-year high as far as the wicks is concerned. But let's move on and talk about your Nifty put call ratio, which stood at around 1.13, now at considerably neutral levels of around 1.1. As far as stocks go, we do have something like CG Power, Marico, and Godrej Industries in focus. Marico specifically seeing a lot of longs building up. And in terms of unwinding, again, we're keeping an eye on Hexaware, Ajanta Pharma, and of course Jet Airways, which keeps moving in and out of the band. So some stocks there to keep an eye on as well, Alex. But we're likely to see a very soft opening today. All right.
Thanks so much for that, Agam. Well, let's look at what's making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the first word headlines.
With big news on President Trump at this hour, the New York Times says President Trump's business lost more than $1 billion between the years of 1985 and 1994. The newspaper cites printouts of IRS transcripts of the federal tax forms and says Trump lost so much money that he was able to avoid paying income tax for 8 of those 10 years. Avoid paying income tax. That's the issue. On Monday, the Treasury Department said it would not release the president's personal and business tax returns to Congress. Important to point out, the New York Times has prior tax returns, not the ones at issue in Congress. Meanwhile, clouds are gathering over the Eurozone. The European Commission cut its overall growth forecast and slashed the outlook for its major individual economy. Brussels now says Germany will expand this year by just 0.5%, less than half the previous forecast. And it says downside risks to the region remain prominent. The Commission also notes exceptional weakness in EU manufacturing. Law enforcement from the U.S., Malaysia, and Singapore meet this week to coordinate their approach to Goldman Sachs over its work for scandal-plagued state investment firm 1MDB. Now, the bank is under scrutiny for its role in helping the fund raise $6 billion in bond sales that generated more than $500 million in fees. Last week, Goldman CEO David Solomon told us the firm had not begun talks with the Department of Justice here in the U.S. over its role in the scandal. And the Thai Election Commission has confirmed that a party linked to the exiled former Prime Minister Shinawatra took the most seats in March's general election. Pheu Thai won 136 of the 350 constituencies in the lower house of parliament, with a pro-military party taking 97 seats. That means both missed an overall majority, and the two are now competing to form a workable coalition. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
Well, Vedanta has reported good set of numbers. Top line front, the company has reported a 15% downtick at a number of around 23,468 crore on consolidated basis. But then that's higher as compared to the estimates of around 22,540 crore that we were working with. In terms of EBITDA, the numbers have come down by 20% to a number of around 6,135 crore. But this again is higher as compared to the Bloomberg consensus estimates of around a figure of around 6,050 odd crore. Margins are in line with expectation, 26.1% compared to the estimate of 26.8%, and year-on-year basis, or the corresponding quarter number, was at 27.8%. Profitability of the company came down by, it slipped as much as 46% to a number of around 2,600 crore as compared to 4,800 crore. But on absolute terms, if you compare that with the estimates, it's way higher because we were working with a number of around 1,413 crore. Now, this is also the sharp dip that we've seen on profitability also includes the exceptional gain to the tune of around 2,869 crore, which we have seen in base quarter, which relates to the impairment charges seen both in the fixed assets of oil and gas and iron ore division. Essentially, the beat is coming in from aluminium and zinc international business, while the performance of a steel business too has been commendable by the company. Apart from that, other income of the company on consolidated basis has risen by 77%, mainly on account of the gains, mark-to-market gains on its overseas investments. Kane investment in Anglo-American PLC that the company in the last quarter disclosed, that has performed extremely well during the quarter. It's resulted into the recognition of around 832 crore of gain in this quarter. Gross debt of the company, that however has increased for the company at 8,066 crore, which is an increase of 8,066 crore, and this is mainly on account of the Electro-Steel acquisition and temporary borrowings at Zinc India. Segmentally, if I'm supposed to give up a picture of how does this number look like, Zinc India reported 23% downtick. Zinc International, where the beat came in at 391 crore, we were working with a number of around 133 crore. Oil and gas division at 1,805 odd crore EBITDA, which is a 20% uptick there. That too have been better than estimates. Aluminium division too managed to surprise at 397 crore. Power division EBITDA slipped by 39 crore and also missed the estimates to an extent. But iron ore division, that again we saw an uptick coming on that division, 35% uptick there. The numbers compared with the estimates, 219 crore compares with that of 240 crore. And steel division too has done substantially well for the company.
Well, in line with indications of the quarterly update for Titan Company, the consensus is expecting a steady quarter coming through, considering a 19% appreciation as far as its top line is concerned, and EBITDA margin standing at around 12% against 11.6%. We could also see profit rise as much as 42% at 401 crores. Now, coming down to the most important segment, the expectation is again of 24 to 25% growth, and as the management has already suggested that Titan for the full year is likely to see over 20% growth, which it has already made considering the first 3 quarters of this financial year. And of course, a bulk of this strength will come on the back of diamond as well as studded jewelry, and of course its collections, specifically the wedding collection, given we did see January as a part of the wedding season. 17% growth seen in watches, as well as a recovery in eyewear segment, where we're likely to see 19% growth. On the whole, expecting a very strong quarter for Titan Company.
Okay, some stocks that we need to watch out for in the midst of the earnings season. So CEAT disappointed as far as their numbers were concerned. Revenues were up 4%, profit was down 17%, and EBITDA was down 18%. Despite fourth quarter seeing a sharp cut in employee and overhead costs, overall the numbers didn't add up. Interest costs have also started to inch up with rising capex. The raw material cost was something that impacted. So as a percentage of sales, raw material as a percentage of sales moved up from 56% to 58%, and that impacted the margins of the company. ABB India results were in line with the Bloomberg consensus estimates. Revenues up 18%, profit up 13%, EBITDA up 60%, so margins at almost 8%. Finance cost was down 87%, and that impacted the profit of the company. In terms of other numbers that you need to watch out for, strong numbers were seen from SL Propack, Brigade Enterprises, as well as Mahindra Logistics. Inline numbers from Gujarat Borosil, while weak numbers were seen from BSE. BSE also announced a buyback of shares, so that is something that probably will keep the stock in focus. The other interesting part was CG Power. There were two developments. First of all, Yes Bank acquired 8 crore shares in the company because of invocation of the pledge. So now they own almost 13% stake in CG Power. And Sunil Mittal continues to acquire more stake in the company. Here, his holding company acquired another 65 lakh shares in the company. The other part was Alembic Pharma. Of late, we've seen a lot of companies move into the China market after Sun Pharma indicated to an interview in Bloomberg News a few days ago. Alembic Pharma has said that they have formed a joint venture with SPH Group and are there to promote and sell products in the Chinese market. Biocon will be in focus. They retain the economic interest in global commercialization of Hulio. It's a drug which is licensed by Mylan, and Biocon will gain a share of profit from the same. SL Group says that Z Entertainment stake sale is at advanced stage. Remember, this comes on the back of the huge sell-off that we saw in the group shares yesterday. And finally, Dewan Housing gets the NHB nod to sell its entire 9.15% stake in Aadhar Housing Finance, and they will sell it to Blackstone's arm.
All right, thanks so much for that, Darshan. Well, there's clearly lots to talk about over the course of the day. You'll find all the live market action right here on Bloomberg Quint Live. There are also several stories that you should consider reading on the website bloombergquint.com. Here are just a couple of them. The US apparently wants India to eliminate trade barriers for American firms and also remove data localization restrictions. US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, who is here on a visit, said that the US expects that the new government will address these issues. Lenders to Reliance Communications moved the NCLT yesterday to appoint a new resolution professional and form a committee of creditors, the first step to begin the bankruptcy proceedings for the Anil Ambani group company that owes close to 50,000 crore rupees to 31 lenders led by State Bank of India. All right, that's all you need to know going into trade today, but there's a lot more that you need to look forward to, and that will come up in just a short while. Do stay tuned. This is Bloomberg Quint.